it when I run out of batteries. So anyway, they're fully loaded now. So welcome. So this is officially, it's the second time with Alpha, but the first week of looking at a particular subject. So here we go, you can see what it is. I thought that we'd start off with some New York street interviews of who people think Jesus is. So have a look at what they thought on the streets of New York. So there you go. Don't know how much truth you think is in any of that, but some interesting opinions about who Jesus is. When I was 4 years old, some of you will know, my baby brother was diagnosed with a terminal illness, a rare form of cancer. Nothing could be done for him, and as he became more and more ill, my dad needed answers to why this was going on. So he locked himself away. Some of you will know, he says he had a bottle of whiskey in one hand, he had a Bible in the other hand, and he locked himself away. A lot of his friends thought he was having some kind of breakdown. He didn't know what to do with himself. He did eventually, thankfully, choose the Bible over the whiskey. And then my brother eventually died in my dad's arms. And then it wasn't that long afterwards that he chose to follow a calling to become a vicar. So he left his life as a car salesman and he began the training for ordination. On my brother's headstone it says, "A child shall lead them," and that's a prophecy that my parents have always kept close to their hearts. So actually from the age of 5 I was brought up in a Christian home, so the name Jesus was very familiar to me. But as I went through life, traumatic experiences in my young years, as a teenager and then growing up, drove me further and further away from this man called Jesus. And I questioned why, if he existed, he allowed such suffering, such pain in the world that he allegedly created. What was this all about? So I tried to discover, in a way, as we're doing here, but in a different way, the meaning of life. What is this all about? Why does this go on? I tried to make sense of the world and of my view of the world and of what was happening. I started training as a counsellor in my 20s, and my trainer was a Buddhist, and I started looking at that. Actually, the idea of Buddhism appealed to me more because I thought that it seemed more full of love, of acceptance, of seeing people as they truly are, seeing the good in people, and I didn't see any of the religious trappings that I'd seen within the church. What I saw the church was. It seemed much more relevant to me at that time of my life. And then 18 years ago, when I was 27 years old, I went along to an Alpha course. I went quite arrogantly along to this Alpha course because I thought, well, I'm just going to prove to these people that there isn't a God. And if there is a God, he's a really evil one, he doesn't exist, so I'm going to kind of help them because they've clearly been brainwashed. And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I guess you could say in a sense my heart was right. I kind of wanted, people to know the truth, that there was no God. So that's the heart I went along with. And there's a film clip that some of you may have seen, the film Changeling. It's a brilliant film. It's a true story about a woman whose child goes missing. It's a really moving film, really sad story, brilliantly acted, worth seeing if you haven't seen it. But there's a little clip in here which shows kind of how I thought if there was a Jesus, what kind of leader he was. This is he's the policeman you'll see here. He's very manipulative and he tries to convince this woman that this young boy is her son that's gone missing, and this woman knows it's not her son. But watch how he tries to manipulate her into believing what he thinks is reality. So there's a leader in a different sense, but deceiving somebody into believing something that wasn't true. Is that how you see Jesus? Well, I definitely had a stage where I thought that is how I see Jesus. But actually, by the end of the Alpha course that I did 18 years ago, I came to the conclusion that I was wrong about that, about how I saw him. So what made me change my mind? Why am I now standing here in this place so convinced that Jesus is so very real? On what basis do we say Christianity is true? What is the evidence for the existence of Jesus? And that's what we're going to look at today. Who is Jesus? And some people see becoming a Christian as being a blind leap of faith. Again, I know I did that, but actually, you know, it takes just as much faith to be an atheist. You can't prove there is a God scientifically, just as you can't prove there isn't a God scientifically. So yes, a step of faith is required, but it's not actually a blind leap. In fact, it's based on firm historical evidence. So did Jesus actually exist? Now, that's what I think it looks like. I just thought I'd get that in there. In a communist Russian dictionary, Jesus was described as a mythical figure who never existed. Well, no serious historian would say that today. There's just too much evidence, more apparently than there is for Julius Caesar and people like that. Many Roman and Jewish historians have written about him, and as well as that, obviously, we have the evidence that's in the Bible and other Christian writings. Some people say, well, the New Testament was written a long time ago. How do we know that what they wrote down hasn't changed over the years? Well, the answer is we know because of a science called textual criticism. So many texts have been written, and the more that are written, the less doubt there is about the original. And as you can see, if you can follow all these points in your manual, if you look in your manual, there's a table of evidence in there which confirms that there's no doubt that it's authentic. So if you just read through that, and there it is, the evidence for it is there. So the next point, which again is in your manuals, was Jesus more than just a good man? You know, who is this Jesus? Few people doubt today that he was human. And he had a human body, he was sometimes tired, he was hungry, he had human emotions, he got angry, he laughed, he got sad, he had human experiences. He was born, he grew up, he was educated, he got tempted, he learned, he worked, he suffered rejection, he suffered bereavement, and then death. But what many say today is that Jesus was only human. And a great religious teacher, Billy Connolly, said, I can't believe in Christianity, but I think Jesus was a wonderful man. So what evidence is there to suggest that Jesus was more than a good religious teacher or a great religious teacher? Well, let's start by saying about what Jesus said about himself. First of all, his teaching. His teaching centred on himself. And in every human heart, there's a hunger. There's three leading psychologists of the 20th century, and they all recognise this. Jung said, people are hungry for security. Adler said, people are hungry for significance. Freud said, people are hungry for love. We all have these three deep needs: self-worth, significance, security. We all need them. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. If you want those hungers satisfied, come to me. Our world is broken, isn't it? And we try to cope without God. We try to do things our own way. Jeremiah talks in the Bible about how we dig our own cisterns. We try and meet those needs, these needs that are up here. We try and meet them for ourselves. But those cisterns leak. They're not good enough. They're leaky cisterns. Many people aren't sure about how to run their lives. What model should they follow? Jesus said, follow me. He said, I am the way and the truth and the life. And so many people struggle with depression, with darkness, with disillusionment, despair, darkness. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. You see, when the light is turned on, the darkness goes. It's that simple, isn't it? It's on, the darkness goes. Many people are afraid of death. It is such a big fear in people's lives. It was such a big fear in my life. I had many years, about 8 years with OCD, and at the root of my problem was a fear of death. Death because I'd lost people, including my brother and other people I loved as a young person. Death because I went through some traumatic experience as a young person where I believed I would die. And also a fear of death because I had a small baby who I nearly lost when she was just 6 weeks old. So I had a lot of fear of death. That was at the root of my problem, and I believe it's at the root of many people's problems that they have today. Jesus says this. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. He gives us that promise of eternal life in heaven. So no matter what happens, we do not need to be afraid. There is no fear in love, which is a precious promise. Many people suffer with anxiety from one degree to another. It's a tragic, horrible problem in society today, as it's always been, but now, you read in the newspapers, Prozac being given out to young people. The suicide rate is so high. So much anxiety in this world. Jesus says this, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And Jesus spoke these words to people who had grown up under religious systems. And he's saying, don't relate to me based on the law. I love you. I can help you. I want to walk with you. I can help you through anything. All things are possible. And often the barrier that stops people coming to know this Jesus is the very thing that he himself opposed while he was here on earth. Religion. It was a barrier for me, and I know it's a barrier for many people. I can tell you that just last night I met some people, different people. I met one couple who she'd been brought up Catholic, and it had the effect of just very religious upbringing. And then I met a couple of chaps, and we ended up, I'd never met them before, and suddenly we ended up with this discussion about religion. And the thing was this, we all agreed that religion is not good. None of us liked religion. But the difference was this, that I know Jesus, and they don't. And that's what breaks my heart, is that religion had put a barrier between these men knowing Jesus because of the damage of religion. Jesus is not religion. And it's such a common thing. I thought it's just last night. How many times is this wall put up where people get confused between Jesus and religion? So I want to, right at the beginning of this, show some of you will be familiar with this, but I want to put this out there. So that we know right from the start the difference between Jesus and religion. And this young man puts it so well, I believe. With spoken word, the difference between Jesus and religion. So let's look at some of the claims that Jesus made. First of all, he claimed that he was able to forgive sins. To forgive sins that have been committed against us is something we can all do as human beings, but to forgive those who have sinned against others is something only God can do. And when Jesus claimed the authority to do that, he was accused of blasphemy. The religious leaders said to him, who can forgive sins but God alone? Then he claimed that he was the one who was going to judge the world. He knew his identity. Jesus knew exactly who he was in God. He claimed to be the Messiah, came to save the world, the ultimate superhero. And he also claimed to be the Son of God. He said, I and the Father are one heart and one mind. So that's the claims that Jesus made. Now that's not the end of the argument, because we can all make claims, can't we? We can all, I could stand here and say I'm Elvis, It's like we can all make these different types of claims, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So we do need to test these claims. It's good not to just accept everything and, oh, that person said that, or that says that. It's good to question these things. So if we test it, there's three possibilities. First of all, it wasn't true. But he didn't realise it wasn't true. In other words, he was deluded. He was insane. The second possibility is it's not true, and he knew perfectly well that it wasn't true, in which case it makes him an evil imposter. And the third possibility is that it is true. So the question is this: was he mad? Was he bad? Or was he God? So what evidence is there to support what he said? Well, first of all, there's his teaching. What he said. Now, the teaching of Jesus is widely known as being the greatest teaching ever. The Sermon on the Mount, love your neighbour as yourself, turn the other cheek, love your enemies, do to others what you would have done unto you. It's where a lot of our morals originate. Many of our laws were originally based on the teaching of Jesus. You know, we're making progress in every area, in science, in technology, we travel faster, we know more, but in 2,000 years no one ever has improved on the moral teaching of Jesus. So could that teaching come from someone who is insane, someone who was evil? A writer called Mike Cain said, Jesus did not come to help us turn over a new leaf, he came to give us new life. Then there's his works, what he did. You know, Jesus must have been the best person ever to be around. Some people say, as I did, when I got it all tangled up with church stuff, Christianity is so boring. But it couldn't have been boring to be with Jesus, could it? So it must be us that makes it boring as a church. Jesus was not boring. There's nothing about him that was boring. Imagine going to the pub with Jesus. You could get a glass of tap water and he'll turn it into a pint. That's amazing, isn't it? You can go to a picnic with Jesus and you don't have to do that thing that I hate of making sandwiches. It's the most boring thing in the world, making sandwiches. You don't have to do that with Jesus. He'll provide the food. Or the beach. You could go to the beach with Jesus. I noticed when I was on holiday in the summer that paddle boards seem to be the latest craze. We stand on those boards and do that thing. When you go with Jesus, you don't have to hire a board, do you? I've got this brilliant t-shirt of Jesus like in the waves, and yeah, he's just walking on the water. So Jesus isn't boring, is he? And it's not just his miracles. It's his love, you know, his love for people that society had rejected. The lepers, the outcasts, the people who were devalued. He loved them, didn't he? He went against what society said, and he spoke up for them. He stood by them. And you may or may not like this fact, but I'll say it anyway. Jesus was a feminist. You know, because the true meaning, sadly, of feminism has been stolen. It doesn't mean a belief that men are bad and need to be dominated by women, and that, you know, we should just not wear deodorant and not wear bras or anything like that, and women are all full of anger and hate. No! Feminism is a belief in the equality, the dignity, the value of women alongside men, which means that Jesus was a feminist. He challenges the prejudice that was so prevalent in that day. He transformed people's lives. He changed hearts, as he does today. And now he's gone to heaven, he leaves us with that job, doesn't he? You know, to challenge injustice, to stand for equality. He left us that work to do. And Jesus chose to lay down his own life. Could you do that? Could I do that? You know? Are these the deeds of someone who is mad or bad? Why would he bother? The character of Jesus has impressed millions who wouldn't even call themselves Christians. There's a quote from Time magazine, and it says, Jesus is the most persistent symbol of purity, selflessness and love in the history of Western man. Jesus was totally and utterly unselfish. He had no self-pity. He was so humble. He was so kind. And even when he was in excruciating pain on the cross, he still said about the people that were torturing him, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. His enemies could find no fault in him, and his friends said, this man had no sin. Some of you may have heard of Judah Smith. He's a young, dynamic pastor. He's got a congregation of 6,000 over in America. And he said this, the fact that Jesus is here not only brings comfort in hard times, it gives us courage that our circumstances can change. Jesus brings life out of death, he brings hope out of sorrow, he turns our mourning into joy. Jesus is there for us when we need him most, whether we know it or whether we appreciate it or not. Jesus will never leave us, he will never abandon us, he will never give up on us. Jesus is always here. Jesus is love. This is the real Jesus. Then there's the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. No one in the history of the world has ever had a whole collection of books written about them before they were even born. Jesus fulfilled over 300 prophecies, written over a period of hundreds of years. 29 of them he fulfilled in one day. That was the day he died. Now you could say, well, maybe he read the Old Testament and he decided that these are the things I need to do. So he went through his life deliberately fulfilling these prophecies. Well, the trouble is, with that, there's many things that he had no control over. Many of the things were how he was going to die, the place where he was going to be buried, his resurrection. Even the place of his birth was foretold. So really it would be too late for him to read about that once he was here. His conquest of death. The physical resurrection of Jesus is the cornerstone of Christianity. Sometimes on Alpha, people say, why don't you start with the question, well, is there a God? You know? Because it's like, well, you start with Jesus, but I don't even believe there's a God, let alone Jesus. Well, the thing is, Jesus came to reveal God. He told his disciples in John 14, verse 9, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. Jesus came to show us God, to show us how much God loves us. So he came as a human. Mike Cain says, God didn't come and play at being a man. He stood right up to his neck in what it means to be a man. He became a refugee. He was mocked by his own family. He was found guilty by an establishment that wanted rid of him. By the grave of a friend called Lazarus, Jesus wept real tears. In the Garden of Gethsemane, the night he was betrayed, there was real sweat on his brow. When they nailed him to a cross, it was real blood that he shed. The point is that God became one of us. So what about the resurrection? What about the evidence that he rose from the dead? Well, first of all, there's his absence from the tomb, as it says in your manuals. Many theories have been put forward. None of them are very convincing. One is that Jesus didn't really die on the cross. Maybe he recovered and took off. Well, he'd undergone a Roman flogging. Then he was crucified. He'd been nailed to a cross for 6 hours. He died. And in those days, bodies were wrapped like mummies in cloths and they were covered in sticky spices. Then he was put in a tomb with a massive stone blocking the entrance. So I think he probably did die. There's a bit more evidence. John chapter 19, which says this. This is when he was hanging on the cross and he died. When they came to Jesus, they saw he was dead already, so they didn't break his legs. They'd broken the legs of the two people that were either side of him and had been crucified. One of the soldiers, however, pierced his side with a spear, and blood and water flowed out. Well, they didn't know it in those days, but what we know now is that that's strong medical evidence that Jesus was dead. It's a separation between the clot and the serum. So we knew we know now that that's what it was. They didn't know that then. They just wrote about it because that's what happened. That's what they witnessed. So, again, I think we can be sure he died. Some people said, well, maybe the disciples came along and stole the body and started a rumour that Jesus had risen. Leaving aside the fact that the tomb was guarded, this is really unlikely. Here is a bunch of people that were depressed, were disillusioned. Jesus had died, so would they really go nick his body? Others have said maybe the authorities stole the body, but that would be crazy because they hated the rumour that Jesus had risen from the dead. I mean, this was victory, wasn't it? This means they'd been beaten. So it made no sense for them to be the ones that arranged a miracle. They wanted to prove he was dead, not alive. Others have said, well, maybe robbers stole the body. Well, there was only one valuable thing in that grave, and that was the grave clothes, and they were left there. So it couldn't have been robbers. So absence from the tomb is the first bit of evidence. Second piece of evidence, his appearance to the disciples. Some people have said, well, it's hallucination. Yes, people do hallucinate, but normally it's highly strung, highly imaginative, nervous people, or people who are sick, or they're on drugs. The disciples don't fit into any of those categories. They were big, burly fishermen. They were tax collectors. Tax collectors don't hallucinate. We're talking about cynics here, skeptics like Thomas, who said, I'm not going to believe he's risen unless I see for myself. Thomas wanted to put his finger in his side to make sure it was actually him. So these weren't the sort of people who would hallucinate. And then look at the number of them. Jesus appeared to over 500 people on 11 different occasions. Are these people really likely to share the same hallucination? After he'd risen, Jesus ate with them. He even cooked breakfast with them on an occasion. He had long conversations with them. Then there's the effect of the resurrection, the transformation of these disciples. And this is where the birth, the growth of the Christian church began. It began with this handful of uneducated fishermen and tax collectors. And it swept across the world in the next 300 years. This would not have happened if Jesus had not risen from the dead. The followers of Jesus were disappointed after he died. They were grieving, they felt let down, they felt abandoned. They wondered if, were his promises true? Were they all unreal, these things that he said? He let them down. So actually it's only because of the resurrection that Christianity began. If he'd remained dead, how could he possibly have been the king that he claimed to be? And the fourth bit of evidence. This one's difficult to argue with, I reckon. Christian experience down the ages. Countless millions of people have experienced Jesus. People of every type of background. They've experienced how he's changed their lives. There's a girl here, some of you may have seen this. She said that Jesus started speaking to her when she was 3 years old. So when she'd done many paintings before this. She was 8 when she painted this picture of the Jesus that she knew so well. So there it is in a painting. There is a billion stories that you can hear. We can argue forever about theology. Forever about it. What proof is there? What evidence is there? But you cannot argue with a transformed life. And preparing this talk, I looked at so many amazing, my head is full of amazing stories, and my bookshelf is full of amazing stories of how Jesus has changed lives, people's testimonies, people's stories. And I thought, I don't know which one to choose. There's so many, you could go on forever. Look it up. Look up people's stories. It's amazing. But you know what? There's one story. You can always come to me. I can tell you a story and you can say, well, how do you know that's true? We can go back to the evidence thing. But you can't argue with my story because I'm here and it's mine. So I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to tell you that there's a time when all I wanted to do was die. And that's the truth. I tried to cope with life in many different ways. As I said, I had OCD. I was also anorexic for many years as a young person, about 8 years. I was overwhelmed with shame from past abuse. I was sectioned. I've just a background of broken relationships. I was a mess, a broken person. Then Jesus found me. And now all I want to do is live. And it's all because of this Jesus. This Jesus. I love him so much. I love him with my whole being. I would not be here without him. And do you know what? I spent a lot of time comparing my life and thinking, actually, do you know what? My life, and it has been. My life's been amazing. Look at what people have had to go through. Look at, I think it was Kate praying this morning. Look at the brokenness of the world. Look at these refugees. Look at what people are going through. It is heart-wrenching. And do you know what? I spent a lot of time comparing my life to others. I used to work with damaged children. The children have been through the most hideous abuse. And I see them and I think, what is wrong with me? Well, do you know what? I don't do that anymore because the truth is, things weren't always easy. And I was robbed of many things. I was robbed of my innocence. I was robbed of my dignity, my choice and my freedom. But do you know what? No one can take Jesus from me. Ever. Anything else can be taken from me. Someone can come take my family. I can't stop that happening. But no one can take Jesus from me. And he loved me so much that he gave his life for me. If I was the only person in this world, he would have given his life for me. That's what we're going to hear about next week, isn't it? When we look at why did Jesus die. He did that so that everything that had been taken from me could be restored to me. So that he could give me beauty for ashes, so that I could hold my head up high, so that he could replace my shame with dignity. In the Bible it says how he pulls us out of the pit and he sets our feet upon a rock, and he did that for me, just for me. No one can take that from me. In August when I was on holiday, I had a random encounter on a beach with my old doctor. So she was my doctor right from when I was 15, so she knew me right through when I was when I was anorexic, right through she was part of the whole process when I was sectioned. So she actually thought I was going to die. She never expected me to live. And there we are, on this beach in Cornwall, and it was just amazing. It's just like, she's moved down there now, she's retired and she's down there, and we just had this big hug, and it's like this, you know, I'm alive. It was just a reminder of seeing her and all the dark things that sort of brought up in me. It just brought it all back to me. He took me from darkness into light. He took me from lies to the truth. Jesus makes a way where there is no way. Jesus takes away the labels that society, that the world would give us, saying, you'll never get over this. You have to just learn how to manage that problem. You'll always suffer with that. Rubbish. Rubbish when you've got Jesus. The best decision I ever made was 18 years ago, when I decided to open my heart to Jesus. And do you know what? There's no going back. His kindness, his acceptance, his love, his unconditional love, his mercy has absolutely blown me away, continues to do so. And that doesn't mean it's always been easy. And that doesn't mean it still is always easy. He doesn't promise us that. What he promises is that he will be with us through all the storms of life. And that's amazing. There's a picture here. When I was in Florida last year on a family holiday, I was just overwhelmed by Jesus. And I was just praying, I was just like, thank you for what you've done. Thank you. I was like, thank you, Jesus. And then I look up in the sky, and I took a photo of it, and it said, above that, it said, thank you. It said, thank you, Jesus. I was like, so there you go, argue with that. Did I make that photo up? Is that photoshopped? Max Lucado says this. He says, Jesus was a backwater peasant. He never wrote a book, he never held an office. He never journeyed more than 200 miles from his hometown. Friends left him, one betrayed him. Those he helped forgot him. Prior to his death, they abandoned him. But after his death, they couldn't resist him. What made the difference? The answer is death and resurrection. For when he died, so did your sin. When he rose, your grave was changed from a final residence to a temporary housing. The reason he did it? The face in the mirror. My prayer is that if you don't know this Jesus, that you would consider doing that. And my prayer, if you do know him, that relationship will grow deeper and deeper and deeper. Because he is the best friend you could ever have. I want to read you one last quote and then I shall pray. Judah Smith is brilliant. He says, Jesus is with you in your home, at your job, in your weaknesses and temptations and failures. Maybe you are facing the toughest situation you have ever faced in your life. Be assured, God is there. His voice calms the storm and gives you rest. Jesus isn't just with you when you are doing well or full of faith or living in holiness. He loved you when you hated him, and he loves you now. He is head over heels in love with you. He is on your side not because of who you are, but because of who he is. His love is unconditional and overwhelming. He is your advocate, your defence lawyer, and your biggest fan. No problem is so big, no failure so permanent, and no enemy so powerful that Jesus cannot give you the victory. Jesus speaks today, just as he did to his disciples so long ago. Be sure of this. I'm with you always. Can I pray? God, thank you so much for giving us Jesus. Thank you so much that you didn't leave us without evidence. We don't have to take a blind leap of faith, but we can take a step of faith to you, based on evidence, based on the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. Based on our experience, God, based on the experience of others around us. Let each one of us this day take a step closer to discovering who you really are. Amen. I just want to leave you with a few books up there if you're into reading that I can totally recommend about Jesus. John's Gospel, always good to have the Bible in there. John, the disciple of Jesus, really knew God, obviously. So John's Gospel is a good one to start with in the Bible if you're not familiar with it. Jesus greater than religion. Jefferson Beck, he's the one that, with the clip which maybe we can show another time. Brilliant young man, very, very good with young people. His name is Jesus Max Lucado, is brilliant. Jesus Is, the book I've been quoting from, he's fantastic. Real Life Jesus and The Jesus Son of New. So they're just a few books. Yeah, anyway, we better get into discussion time.